I am Elizabeth Reese. For those of you that don't know me, I'm one of the clergy at St. Paul's Episcopal Church, and we are so glad to be gathered here, not just with St. Paul's folks, but with folks from other Alexandria churches and the community as well. It's good to be together, and I know that whatever happens next, our voices and our actions and our prayers will be stronger for it. So thank you all for being part of this. So many of us from St. Paul's and from the other churches too, from Christ Church and Resurrection, and maybe there's other churches on here as well, have been part of the Episcopal Church's Sacred Ground curriculum. And that led us into learning and thinking and studying and reflecting on the history of racial injustice that has been part and parcel of this country since its founding. And after doing some of that work and thinking and kind of inward journey, some of us wanted to continue digging deeper into what that meant for us right here in our city of Alexandria. And so we have been taking topics each month to dig deeper into the systemic racial injustice that is going on right here in Alexandria. So last month, some of you were with us, we got a glimpse of how racism affects housing. And tonight we are focusing on education. And the ground to be covered obviously is enormous, and Gregory Hutchins cannot talk about everything, but we are so glad that we get to have him with us to start this conversation, and who knows where it will lead us. So we are going to begin by grounding ourselves in prayer, and I'm thankful to have Orrin Warder, the rector of St. Paul's, to lead us in that. Thank you.
Thank you. I echo that welcome. We're so glad that you're here. Dr. Hutchins, especially grateful for your time this evening. My meditation is part of a larger project that I'm working on that I hope to share with the congregation of St. Paul's in the coming months. The title of the project is called Seeking the Welfare of the City, and the project is based on the prophet Jeremiah, chapter 29, verse 7. Seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you, for in its welfare you will find your welfare. Living over 2,500 years ago, God's prophet Jeremiah understood a simple and profound truth, that all human societies are both interconnected and interdependent. Even in exile, Jeremiah knows that his well-being, for good or ill, is directly tied to the well-being of all his neighbors. This is a lesson that God's people keep learning and relearning, and is a lesson that we, to our great detriment, often forget. I think one of the harsh lessons of the global pandemic has taught us that our human interconnection and interdependence can bring forth both weal and woe. While we have witnessed firsthand the heroism and sacrifice that have sustained and saved our lives, we have also seen how a virus can ravage the vulnerable in our communities, bring to the fore the vast and indisputable inequalities and injustices that exist in our local community and in our global community. For those living under the consequence of these unequal and unjust systems and circumstances, this is a constant reality. For those who created and those who consciously and unconsciously perpetuate and benefit from these conditions, this is a time of awakening and reckoning. In several places in both the Old and New Testaments, the Bible speaks of the sins of parents being visited on their children. For some, this adage has served as a warning against divine judgment. Others see it as an antiquated and unenlightened remnant of the distant past, and insist that we can only be responsible for our own individual actions and can certainly not be held accountable for the transgressions of past generations. Perhaps another way of viewing this biblical theme is maybe it's less of a warning and less of a statement of judgment and more of an observation and an explanation of the complexity of human relationships over time, and also reveals the fact that sin does, in fact, have a corporate dimension. One relevant example, of course, is the conversations that we are having, this long and corrosive legacy of racial violence and injustice, and the undeniable truth that in spite of many gains, these past sins can and do have a lasting and present reality. The question, of course, is what do we do about it? How can we atone for the sins of past generations? And rather than retreat into paralysis or fatalism, how do we actively break these patterns and create new systems that are more just and equitable and serve the common good. For it is in seeking the welfare of the city that we seek our own welfare. It seems to me that these are the core questions as we continue our conversations and continue to explore systemic racism in Alexandria. And for tonight, as we focus on education in our community. As we begin this evening, we now pause to offer our time and ourselves to God as we do this work and ask God's guidance and presence in the midst of us this night. The prayer I offer, I have adapted from a new liturgical resource from the Lutheran Church. It's called All Creation Sings. Let us pray. Oh God, you have formed us to bear your divine image, and you intend for us to live together in harmonious dignity. We pray that all who suffer the cruelties of racial or ethnic prejudice in all its many forms, we pray for them. Grant your spirit of power to all who are oppressed. Give healing to the victims of violence, protection to the vulnerable and abused, better housing and worthy employment to the mistreated, courage to the fearful, strength to parents and caregivers. And especially this evening, we pray for hope for our children and youth. Purge the privilege of their sense of superiority and lead your church and society to foster communities of equity and diversity. We pray this in the name of God, whose wondrous name is love. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Oren. And now I'm going to turn it over to Renee and Andy Monday, who have been behind the scenes planning tonight's event.
Good evening, everyone. This evening we have joining us the Superintendent for the Alexandria City Public Schools, Dr. Gregory Hutchings, Jr. Dr. Hutchings is an alumni himself of T.C. Williams High School, class of 1995. Prior to becoming a superintendent, he was the director of pre-K through 12 initiatives and director of middle school programs within ACPS, where he launched the candidacy phase of International Baccalaureate program. He also worked collaboratively with the curriculum department on the implementation of the middle school curricula within ACPS. Starting in 2013, he served for 5 years as the superintendent of Shaker Heights Schools in Cleveland, Ohio, where there he led the way to close the achievement gap to ensure all students, regardless of their backgrounds, had access to resources, tools, and opportunities to succeed. He became the superintendent to Alexandria City Public Schools in 2018. Dr. Hutchings, it is indeed an honor and privilege to have you as a guest speaker this evening. Sir, the Zoom floor is yours.
Thank you all so much. First off, I just want to say thank you for this opportunity. And I wish that I could start all of my meetings off this way. That right there would give me like a calm, peaceful start of a meeting. So just thank you all for this warm welcome and the prayer. So I just really appreciate that. I am excited to be here tonight to talk with you all about Alexandria City Public Schools and to share our work as we are becoming an anti-racist school system. And it is something that, one, is near and dear to my heart as a graduate of Alexandria City Public Schools, kindergarten through 12th grade. I'm a product of the school system. And I know, as a student, I had challenges going through the school system. And I faced a lot of adversity in the schools. I mean, a lot of people don't know this, but when I was a 10th grader at T.C. Williams, I literally had to do a petition to get into honors classes. Because they said that I did not meet the qualifications. And fortunately, my forever principal, Mr. John Porter, who currently works as a consultant in Alexandria City Public Schools and leads all of our executive searches, he believed in me and he said, well, I don't care what the policy says, I want to give you a shot. And that literally changed my entire trajectory for the rest of my life. And I still thank him. He is acknowledged in my dissertation when I graduated from William and Mary with my doctorate, and he continues to be a confidant and a friend and a colleague even to this day. So I have some of my own personal stories in regards to Alexandria City Public Schools, but I'm not talking about me tonight. I get to talk about our organization. So I know that Renee, I believe you're going to share your screen so we can go through the presentation this evening. And then we're going to have an opportunity to answer any questions that you all may have from the presentation tonight. So let's go ahead and we can go to the next slide. And I just want to give a little bit of background around who we are in Alexandria City Public Schools, because a lot of times people have a misinterpretation or misperception of what our school system is like because they think of the city of Alexandria, which is a predominantly white and affluent community as a city. However, our schools, our largest population is actually Hispanic, and we are 61% economically disadvantaged in regards to our families that we serve. We also have 32% of our students who are eligible for English learner services. So English is a second language for many of our families. And a lot of people are shocked when they see these statistics because they think of Old Town when they think of Alexandria, and they think of all of the tourism that happens within our city and being in close proximity to Washington, D.C., our nation's capital. They just have a very different perception of what our school system is like. But this is who we are. If you can go to the next slide. Today, I want to talk a little bit about the fact that we are in a dual pandemic. And when we use the term dual pandemic in Alexandria City Public Schools, we're referring to the fact that we're all being impacted by our global pandemic, which is COVID-19 and our COVID-19 crisis that everybody's experiencing all over the world. But in addition to our global pandemic, we are faced with a significant racial divide and racial tension within the United States of America right now. And this is something that's not new for us in America. This is something that we've been dealing with, I know, for my entire life. And it's been around for over 400 years, this divide and this racial tension that has come to a head, over the past couple of years. And that sends for us, it gives us a huge hurdle that we are going to have to overcome, which I believe, just as Martin Luther King would say during the Civil Rights Movement, we shall overcome. I really believe that we will. I really believe that this is something that we finally can do. This is the right time. And it's going to require all of us, regardless of what racial background you have or socioeconomic status or where you live or what your religion is or what your gender may be. It's going to require all of us to really come together to make this narrative come to fruition of us having a place where everybody matters. Next slide, please. So I want to talk a little bit about courage and boldness. And I was sharing this earlier as we were talking prior to this session. I was meeting with a smaller group. And I said it really takes courage and it takes boldness in order to make change. And this is a time in Alexandria City Public Schools where we have a school board, a superintendent, a city, as well as staff who are saying no longer will we allow for students' needs to not be met in our school division. And no longer will somebody's race determine what their outcomes will be. And unfortunately, that has been our narrative for many, many years. I'm sure you all are familiar with Thomas Chambliss Williams. And if you're not, that's what T.C. Williams High School is named after. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that later on today. But he believed that Black and white children should never be under the same roof. And through his beliefs that were very bold at that time and very expressive, we still named our only high school after him. And continue to have our only high school named after him. So it's deep-rooted hatred that we have within our school system and city that we must overcome. Next slide. So I want to talk a little bit about our strategic plan, and we use our strategic plan as our roadmap to our success. And we went through a full strategic planning process in Alexandria City Public Schools. We started our journey in 2019. The board adopted our new strategic plan just this past summer in June of 2020. And what is so bold about this plan, and I'm going to talk a little bit about this later, is the fact that racial equity is the heart of all of our work. And that is something that we believe in Alexandria City Public Schools, and it is the center of everything that we do moving forward. Next slide. We started our strategic planning journey with what we called at that time a strategic planning workbook. And specifically, we looked at all of our data within our school division, and we disaggregated that data by race and socioeconomic status to see, are there any disparities in regards to academics or discipline or graduation rates? And what we found was that we had significant disparities in certain areas, particularly with our Hispanic students and their white counterparts. And it was something that we knew we were going to have to make some changes in regards to how we deliver instruction and how our students learn within our school buildings. So we will, I'm going to talk more about some of the outcomes that we're seeking just later. We should go to the next slide. So this is kind of our motto for our new strategic plan, which was adopted, as I said before, in 2020. It's a 5-year plan, and it really is focused on equity for all. And, a lot of, people said, well, why equity and not equality? And for us, we knew that equity was meeting students where they are, not necessarily where we wanted them to be. And some students need more than others. So if we do things that are equal, you may still not be giving that particular student everything that they need in order to be successful. So when you provide students with things that are equitable, you're giving each and every student exactly what they need and not what their counterpart or what their fellow classmate may have. Next slide. So why racial equity? I love this picture because it shows the diversity really of Alexandria City Public Schools. We have over 119 countries represented in our school system, over 120 languages that are spoken in the homes of our students. So we are one of the most diverse school divisions in this region, and really in the top diverse school divisions across the country. So we are like the Mecca of diversity right here in the city of Alexandria. So it's a huge gift for us to have this kind of diversity. And this is why we had to start with the racial equity component. Next slide. Race, as I said earlier, is the root cause for any and everything that we do. When we talk about our special education programs, when you add race to that, you find implications. When we talk about our talented and gifted programs and you add race to that, you find implications. When we talk about discipline and you add race to that, you will see that there are disparities. So race really is a root cause for many of some of the disparities that we see in our data, not just in Alexandria, but really across our country. And we wanted to ensure that we were tackling the root cause. And this is why race was so important. Next slide. Racial equity for us, this gives you an idea of what it means to us, because a lot of people, they have their own definition as to what equity is, especially when you talk about racial equity. And racial equity in Alexandria City Public Schools is when race does not determine the quality of life or the opportunities or outcomes that our students will experience. We had to ensure that as we went through this journey in becoming an anti-racist school system, that we were removing barriers to prevent, barriers, that were preventing our students from achieving their goals. We had to make sure that we were not allowing for the racial inequities that were pervasive in our schools and continue to be even today, that they are not allowing for our students to have to experience these two worlds that we have in many of our schools. Next slide. So we had to establish some clear principles, and specifically we focused on our data, and I shared our data workbook kind of concept with you earlier, but we wanted to look at what were our findings, what are our recommendations. We had to hear from our internal and our external stakeholders. In Alexandria, we had a reputation of listening to the loudest people, right? And sometimes when you do that, you are forgetting about the unspoken people. The people who may not know they have a voice, the people who may speak another language, the people we don't see in our school buildings. So we wanted to be extremely intentional about making sure that all voices had a seat at the table. We wanted to be equity focused, as I said earlier, and we wanted to have alignment with what we were doing within our schools and our central office, as well as with our city. There has been a disconnect for many years within the city of Alexandria and Alexandria City Public Schools. And that disconnect has contributed to some of the disparities and gaps that we see in our data right now. We also had to prioritize. And our prioritization was ensuring that we're not trying to do everything under the sun, right? When you try to do everything under the sun, nothing gets done. We really needed to look at all of our needs as a division, and we had to really prioritize what are our key performance indicators? What are the goals that we are trying to accomplish over the next 5 years? And that is what is helping us to stay the course and to serve our students and see the progress that we're already seeing as we're embarking on this journey. Next slide. I want to talk a little bit about our identity project, and I don't know if you all know anything about this. I kind of alluded to this earlier when I talked about Thomas Chambliss Williams, but we also did a name change of Matthew Morey Elementary School, and our goal was to really make sure that we were helping our community understand and learn what these two worlds are in the city of Alexandria and also in Alexandria City Public Schools, and to know the history of some of the people that our schools are named after. And then for our community to make a decision on, is that aligned with our core values? Is that aligned with what we believe as a city or as a school system? And this journey led to us actually changing our names. And I want to talk a little bit about that before we go into our Q&A. So next slide. So I talked about Thomas Chambliss Williams, and this is a picture of him, and you'll see Matthew Morey as well. You see the diversity that we now have in our schools. I know Thomas Chambliss Williams is rolling over in his grave right now, saying that he never wanted Black and white children under the same roof. But now we have 119 different countries under the same roof represented. And our students, they go off to do some amazing things. We knew that our history, right, was not aligned with who we are today and what we're striving to be in the future. And we didn't want to erase our history. A lot of times people say, well, let's just forget about what happened. Our goal wasn't to erase our history. Our goal was to help our community know our history so that we can do better in our future. We have to accept the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I think that when you don't, that is when history begins to repeat itself. So we were very adamant around ensuring that our community knew who our schools were named after and what their beliefs were during their time. Next slide. These are some of the key critical factors, and I'm going to go through a couple of steps that we took, but we wanted this process to be student-led. Our students are the next generation. They are our tomorrow. And we wanted to ensure that our students had a voice and that they were leading the way. We as adults had to step out of the way, including me as superintendent. You know, a lot of people wanted me to take a stance early on and say, what do you want, Dr. Hutchings? And I was very, very transparent around the fact that it's not about what I want. I've already graduated from T.C. Williams High School, right? And I'm proud of being a graduate of T.C. Williams. Let's talk about what this generation needs and what they want. And let's allow that to drive our decision making. And that's exactly what we did. Next slide. Yep. We just go to the next slide. But just to give you a gist of what that was all about, was specifically one of our teachers was talking with our students about what their thoughts were around race and around Matthew Morey Elementary School. What did that mean to them now that they know his history? How did that change their perspective about their school? And we really wanted to hear what our students were saying. And many of our students, they talked about how now that they know who, you know, the person or the school is named after, now that they know what they stood for, that it bothers them or it makes them concerned about being a part of their school. And these were things that we felt were very important for us throughout our decision making and through our identity project journey. So you can go back to the presentation. If you click back at the top and then click at the top level, go to the next. Yeah, don't click on that because it'll make you take you to the video again. Click over where it says history. Yes, right there. Click there. That'll take us to the next. Perfect. So we had student engagement as a part of, and I mentioned this earlier, we allowed our students to lead our way throughout this process. And it was important for our school board representatives. We have student representatives on our school board, Ashley and Lorraine, who actually facilitated all of our student groups and all of the discussions and many of our community sessions that occurred throughout this period of time. Next slide. Keep going. You can keep clicking through those. And this is just specifically talking about, we wanted to make sure that we did intentionally focus on hearing the voices of our Black and Hispanic students. Because we wanted to know specifically, what is it that this name, now that you know the history, what is that doing to you and your psyche? What are your thoughts about that? How is that impacting your life? You know, we would hear a lot of messages around this T.C. Williams or Matthew Morey, this is impacting Black and brown children. But I would always ask, you know, community members sometimes, well, have you spoken to some of these Black and brown children? And they hadn't. So I said, let's hear what they are saying so that we're not making assumptions as to what they believe based on, you know, the history of our schools. And we had these community conversations that were very, very rich and gave not only me, but also our board and community some insight to what our students are faced with, you know, in our schools. Next slide. We had community input from many of our community entities throughout the city of Alexandria. We heard from Gwenday Fuller, who it's not Gwenday Lewis, that's Gwenday Fuller. So we got that typo right there. But she is the daughter of Ferdinand T. Day, who was the first African-American school board chair in the Commonwealth of Virginia, right here in Alexandria, which is amazing. I mean, he was one of the Secret Seven, and these were African-American men who helped pretty much integrate the city of Alexandria, and they were trailblazers in regards to integration and the civil rights movement. We also heard from PTA members and former Titans from, you know, the movie Remember the Titans. I'm sure everybody knows that movie that Denzel Washington played, Coach Boone. So all of these were opportunities for us to get that input from key individuals who have the insight about our history and understanding of all the complications that we have, you know, with our history and our past. Next slide. You can click again. These are just some of our survey results from our first survey. You can click because there are a couple of things on here. That's just going through some of our responses, as well as, you know, how we really engaged not only our parents, but our students and our alumni. And we crossed different racial, you know, boundaries, which was a great thing for us. So we had multiple perspectives at the table, and not just the loudest voice, right? We had intentional events where we went into communities that we typically did not hear from, those communities and those voices, to hear their opinions and their stories and their truths about, these two individuals in the history. Next slide. This is pretty much our full process of when the board voted to rename T.C. Williams, which we were really excited about renaming T.C. as well as Matthew Morey Elementary School. And we've gone through doing a student essay and poster campaign to propose these name changes. And, we had sessions where we had these semifinalists that we had to present to the board, and then we put it out in our community on our website to hear from the community. And we had public speaking engagements and public hearings for people to voice their opinions around the names that we wanted to propose for TC. And now I'm going to show you the names, because that's a big deal. Tell you a little bit about these individuals. You can click to the next slide and go to the next slide. So these are two new names. So T.C. Williams High School is now renamed Alexandria City High School. And it's named after the city of Alexandria. Believe it or not, as we were doing our history, in the early 1900s, we had an Alexandria High School right here in the city of Alexandria. And the name changed, for whatever reason. It was only Alexandria High School for a few years. And then that name changed. So it's like full circle. We're going back to the name of our city, especially at a time when our city is saying that the city is also on this journey of being anti-racist and accepting all. So we said, wow, that's what we stand for too. Let's have our name, our high school, be named after a city that believes that. And then Matthew Morey has now been renamed to Naomi L. Brooks Elementary School, and she is a third or fourth generation Alexandrian, who was the first African-American in her family to go to college and to go off to become an educator and to live all over the world and to teach children all over the world. And a proud member of Alfred Street Baptist Church, where I'm a member of as well, here in the city of Alexandria. She passed away last year. But when we talk about Black excellence, Naomi L. Brooks is the epitome of that. Someone who raised her children with her husband, and they just are what we call, like a success story. She went to Parker Gray when schools were segregated, went off to Virginia State University to get her degree. And she's just a remarkable woman. And it's the perfect name for Matthew Morey, but Naomi L. Brooks Elementary School. Next slide. So I want to stop here because I know that you all have questions. These are all of some of our wonderful children. As you can see, the diversity in our kids. And this is why we do this work for sure. But I did want to open the floor for questions for us to have just kind of some Q&A. Renee, there may be a couple of questions I know that you wanted to start off with, and then we can open the floor for anything else that people might ask. I know we have a chat feature as well.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so we have some in the chat, and we already have some.
Solve this issue alone. We just can't. I mean, for one, BIPOC people, and that's Black, Indigenous, people of color, didn't create the problem. So it would be unattainable for, Black, Indigenous people of color to fix the problem. So it is going to require us to really kind of come together as a nation and say, this is just not good. I mean, as you all watch television, and I'm sure many of you are watching your news and reading, whether you do social media, the newspaper, we're at a huge racial divide right now. There's so much racial tension. I mean, you can't go any day without seeing something. And I mean, I'm sure you all are sick of seeing this too. It's like lives are being taken for nothing other than the color of their skin. That's the common thread, that there are Black people that are losing their lives, being murdered for nothing in our country. And it's happening right before our eyes. And it's going to require us to really be bold enough to say, this is too much and we have to do something about this. We can't allow another day to keep going by where this is acceptable. And I believe that there's hope. I have faith that this narrative is truly changing. I was sharing with somebody recently for the first time. So I'll be 44 on May 13th. I'll have my birthday in a couple of weeks. I can't wait. I'll be 44. I'm like, now everybody's like, you're so young. Like, no, I'm not young anymore. I'm 44. I'm 44 years old. I have 2 kids. I've been married for 19 years. I'm not a baby. And I have all this gray from this COVID-19. Oh my God. I didn't look like this like 2 years ago, everybody. But I was telling somebody recently that in my 44 years, I have never been, I've never felt like I have been heard, seen, or acknowledged the way I feel I have been over the past just few months as a person, as a Black person. And they're little things. Like I was in the grocery store and I saw on the cover of all the magazines a Black person. I've never seen that before. I was like, wow, that's like on every magazine. It wasn't just Essence magazine. It was every magazine that particular day had a Black face or a Black person on the cover. And I had never seen it in all these years. Whereas white America, that's the norm. You get to see that all the time. It's, you're not like, oh my God, I took a picture of it, by the way. Like I took a picture of that because I had never seen that before. And these are the types of things that, that sometimes, when I talk about white privilege, it's not in a negative way. These are just privileges that, some white people, really all white people have, whether you use it or not, you have it because this is how this construct has been created. But these are things that you never really have to think about. And it makes a difference to me. It makes me proud. And it makes me say, wow, I do matter. I am acknowledged. I am somebody. And it gives me that extra pep, in my step. But I'm going on a tangent. But that is how you all can make a difference, by having these courageous conversations, by making sure you're growing in your own understanding around race. And I really strongly encourage people to read, to ask questions, be vulnerable. No question is a dumb question. I always say that. I mean, I'm a teacher, of course, so teacher at heart. I'm always going to be a teacher, even though I'm a superintendent. I will always be a teacher, everybody. And my kids at home, my biological children will tell you that. So you have to ask those questions and learn. And I think that is how you can make a difference.
Well, thank you. And we do plan on continuing our journey with that background. So I'm going to go to the chat. Marilyn asked, what, if any, impacts in Alexandria when so many European American citizens send their children to private schools in Alexandria instead of the public school?
So say that part again.
So what, if any, impacts in Alexandria when so many European American citizens send their children to private schools in Alexandria instead of public school?
Yeah.
I guess if there's...
Yeah, I don't know if there's really a significant impact, right? There were some questions out in our community around like the pandemic and how many people left ACPS. And we had less than 2% of our families leave ACPS, and majority of the people who didn't enroll their kids were kindergarten families. It wasn't that we had rows of people like just running out of the ACPS and going to private school this year. One, the private schools can't handle everybody coming into their buildings once the school year has begun. So that's almost impossible to happen. And two, I think many of our families do value, now in spite of the pandemic and no matter what the situation is, everybody's kind of at a disadvantage with this pandemic and schooling. But a lot of people do value the diversity that Alexandria City Public Schools offers, because it will give your children, especially our white children, our European American children, an opportunity to be immersed and at least exposed to other cultures. Now, what we have to work on, though, is in spite, separate from the private school thing. We have to work on how do we integrate more of our classrooms and our school buildings. And let me tell you what I mean by that. Our community in the city of Alexandria is segregated by neighborhoods. Whether we want to admit it or not, it is. Just think, I'm thinking of, I live on Payne Street, South Payne Street in Old Town. I know that on my street, there are no other African-American families on my street. And we're the only ones, right? It's a majority white area. Old Town is majority white. When you go up to the west side, you're going to find more of our international families. In certain pockets, you're going to find Hispanic. In other areas, you're going to find our Ethiopian community. So we're kind of segregated. And what ends up happening with the segregated housing and communities that we have is these communities and housing areas are zoned to schools. And that contributes to now schools being de facto segregated. It's not on purpose like it was in the 50s and 60s, but it's happening because of our neighborhood segregation that we have throughout our community. And we need to be thinking through, how do we fix that? And how do we solve when we get to the high school, which is one high school in the city of Alexandria, one public high school. How do we address the fact that we have classes, even in this most diverse high school? It's the most diverse in the Commonwealth of Virginia, probably in the top 10 across the country, right? How do we still have all white classes? In 2021, right now, I can walk into an all white class in Alexandria City Public Schools when our white population is only 30%. It's a very small, our largest population is Hispanic. It doesn't add up. It's like, how is that possible? Even, mathematically, how is that possible? So those are some of the things that we really are going to have to tackle and work through. That's the huge dilemma that we have. That's the hard work. Changing the name, I think, it was a 9-month process, but that was low-hanging fruit. That was the easiest thing to do, was to change 2 names of a school. That really was, in comparison to what we have to do with integrating our classrooms and making sure that our students with special needs, that their needs are being met. Our students who are part of our talented and gifted programs, that their needs are being met. Our students who are just average, that their needs are being met, that we have multiple pathways. Everybody doesn't want to do STEM. Some people want to do the arts and they're going to become great artists one day. How do we make sure that we're giving them that option too? And giving everybody something that they can do and be prosperous in our schools. So I'm long-winded when I get to these questions. I'm just passionate about this stuff. I'm sorry. Let's go to the next question, because I can keep talking about that one for a long time.
We love it. Thank you, sir. Next question.
Yeah, absolutely. And Trish asked a great one. Can you give us an example of how you operationalize equity to ensure that each child gets what he or she needs? How do you operationalize that?
Yeah, so I'll give you an example of how do we operationalize that. So right now, and I'm gonna talk about like our schools in general. So I talked about how we have segregated communities throughout the city of Alexandria. Well, we do know that some of our schools on the west side, and even a couple on the east side, have almost 90% students within that school who are eligible for free and reduced lunch, right? In comparison to another school like Laos Crouch that may have like 13%, Well, how we provide equity or operationalize equity is by ensuring that there are additional services for that particular school. It can't be equal. It can't be, all right, so you have one psychologist and you get one psychologist. Well, this school, we know based on our research and also just our own data that some of our students who are in certain populations, they're bringing additional challenges only because of the adverse childhood experiences that they have, whether it's poverty or hunger or not having the appropriate clothing or things of that nature. They bring challenges for them. So we're going to have additional social workers and psychologists for that particular school, because our students in that particular school are experiencing other challenges that here in another building, they're not. But then the other building may have things that the other school doesn't need, you know? They may have too many students that signed up for band. So now we gotta have 2 band teachers versus 1, you know, like, or things of that nature. So that is how we are operationalizing equity. That's just a example that I can share, you know, right off the top of my head, that's major, that we have done within our school division.
No, that was a great example of equal versus equity. The next question, actually, Marilyn, this is actually a good timing for this during our present time. What are you thinking or planning regarding police presence in schools? Do students have opportunity to comment on this as well?
Yes, you know, this is, I didn't watch the city council meeting tonight, but I heard that the city council, they are going to be voting to defund our school resource officers, right? I have a concern with that. And I was honestly battling with this one. As a Black person in America, you know, with all the policing that's happening across this country, I want to be like, all police need to just go away, right? That's what I innately want to say. But then I think about, hold on, wait, let me think about the situation. Let's think about this city. Are we in this city having the problems that other cities are having with policing right now? And no, we're not. We're not having, though. I can't bring the national narrative to my decision making, right? I had to be intentional about separating that. Like, how can I bring that narrative into my discussion when that's not our problem right now? And one thing that we talked to the board about was, we have no data right now saying that SROs shouldn't be in our schools. The data we have right now, our kids are saying they love their SROs. They're playing soccer with their SROs. They're looking up to their SROs. Our SROs are engaging our students. I don't have data to say our SROs are intimidating our kids or arresting our students or, you know, policing in the halls. So if I don't have those data points, it is not appropriate for me to say, well, now let's move SROs out of our schools because everybody else across the country is doing it. I don't think that's the right message. So I supported our SROs being in our school buildings for right now. And what I have recommended to the board, and this came from our students and our staff as well, it wasn't just my decision to say these things. What I learned from, you know, polling our students and our staff was that they valued our SROs and that they wanted them in the schools. Our city, you know, some of our city council people, they think differently, you know, and I have to respect, you know, their decisions and why they're making their decisions, but I don't have to agree with that. I still stand true to the recommendation that I made to the board, which was to continue to have our SROs in our schools and to gather some data so that we can determine whether it is appropriate or not and whether it's making a difference or not in our schools. And then let's make a decision after we have the appropriate data. But right now we don't have enough data to say SRO should be out of the schools. But that's my soapbox, and I'll see what the news says tomorrow, you know, about everything once now that the city council has made the decision, when it's definitely against what the schools have said and what we want. So.
Well, regardless, we wish you well with that issue, as it's pretty evident. We also just had a question. What are some of the significant KPIs you talked about that you'll use to determine where you are toward your goal of removing barriers from children to achieve success?
Yes.
Are there different difference depending on the age of the children?
So yes, they are. And actually, that's a great question. That sounds like an educator. Really where that's coming from are some of the KPIs, or key performance indicators. That's what KPIs are, that we're looking at the elementary level. We're looking at students reading on grade level, because that is very important. By 3rd grade, the students are reading on grade level, because when you get into 3rd grade, you're now learning, you're now reading to learn. You know, you're not learning how to read. You're learning how to read from pre-K through 2nd grade. That's how you're learning how to read. You're reading to learn 3rd grade on. So if you're not on grade level in 3rd grade, you are already going to be behind your peers, and you're going to continuously play catch up, and that gap can just widen every year. It just gets wider and wider, and you're not learning because you can't read. So one of our key indicators, key performance indicators in third grade is looking at our reading levels, making sure students are on reading level. We also understand that some of our students, based on developmental, challenges that they may experience, that there could be some additional supports that might be needed for them to read. But we still expect for our kids to learn how to read, right? We still got to set the bar high and provide the support to get the student where they need to be. At the middle school level, we're looking at things such as when students are taking things like algebra, when students are receiving any type of high school credit, at the middle school level, and things of that nature, just to make sure that they are on par to take challenging courses if they choose at the high school level. And at the high school level, we're looking at things, some of our KPIs are looking at things such as our enrollment in our upper level courses like honors or AP, and what the demographics are in those classes. If we are a majority Black and Hispanic school system, we should not see majority of our students in these honors and AP classes white. Like, it just shouldn't be that way. The numbers could still be the same in regards to the numbers of white students, but the percentage shouldn't be so high in comparison to our other populations. So those are just some of the key metrics that we're looking at. We're also looking at graduation and students graduating on time, and having multiple ways for students to graduate. Every child is not going to want to come to school every day, sitting in 7 periods all day long, right? And what we've learned from our data is that many of our Hispanic male students, they were dropping out of high school. And as we dug deeper, the reason why some of them are dropping out is because they're going to work and they have to provide for, and contribute to their families. And their work is more important than going to school for right now. So what we are now doing is developing a part-time programming where we're able to have these students in our classes part-time, and we find them jobs that they don't have to go find out on the streets. We find them jobs that give them a really good salary or good money, and we're giving you your education too. So you can still graduate on time. You may have to take classes in the summer to keep up to graduate on time, but we are now giving or preparing you for whatever career certification program. So now you can have a career when you get out of TC. But these are some of the things that we're doing in response to our data.
Yeah, we've specifically heard of that dilemma of students are leaving school so they can support their families because of the situation. So thank you for that. One of the questions that just popped in is, can you address the learning loss that inevitably happened in the remote learning of the pandemic that has more heavily impacted, obviously, students of color or English learners?
That's right. It's impacted everybody, really. At the end of the day, now we're beginning to see students who didn't have any academic challenges happen because of our pandemic, which that's $1 million question. It really is. This is why I believe being a superintendent during this pandemic is really the hardest job ever. I thought the job was, challenging, but I like a challenge. I'm up for a challenge, right? I didn't know about COVID-19 and this global pandemic. And it has caused some significant challenges, as well as the social and emotional loss that students have, separate from the academic loss, just the social emotional aspect of it. Kids not being able to have the socialization with their peers, and, emotionally having to wonder, what does tomorrow bring? Everything is so uncertain. I have to wear a mask. Is the world ending? I mean, there's so many things that kids are going through. Even, our children, our biological children in our home are going through some of that too. Some of the things that we're working on is we have what we are calling a focus on social, emotional, and academic learning. We also call it SEAL, S-E-A-L. And specifically, what we're doing is we're ensuring that we're monitoring where we see students are academically, and we're providing some additional supports. Now, some of those supports right now are virtual, right? And virtual doesn't work for everybody either, right? So that's another challenge that we've had. Now we're getting kids back into our buildings, which is great. Over the past couple of months, we have about 8,000 students in our buildings now. Almost 50% now of our kids are in our building at least 2 days a week. Now that we have some of our kids back into our school buildings, we're able to provide even more supports that weren't just as beneficial virtually. And this was one of the reasons why we stuck to having the 2 days versus the 4 days a week for kids, because if we kept it at 2 days, then we could have 2 cohorts and we can bring in more students, you know. And what a lot of other school divisions are doing to get to 4 days is that they cut off the number of people who can come back to allow for you to have everybody in there 4 days a week with, you know, with 3 feet apart in your classrooms. We wanted to focus more on allowing as many kids to come back as possible. I still get pushback about it because everybody else is doing something different, except for us in Arlington. We're the only 2 who aren't doing, you know, 4 days a week for everybody. But we do have 4 days a week starting for our students who are part of our citywide program. And these are students with disabilities that are going to transition to 4 days per week. We also, to address this, we're looking at our summer learning, and we're doing summer learning for all. And it's not mandatory, but it's open to all students so that, you know, students who are experiencing some of this academic loss or social and emotional loss, that we're able to, you know, help support them during the summer so that we can, you know, help them start off the year in the fall a little ahead, further ahead than they are right now. So the goal is to try to catch them up as much as we possibly can.
Well, thank you for that, Dr. Hutchins. We've got a few more, if you're still willing to entertain a few more questions.
Yes.
This next one is, this one actually hits home. Some of us adults didn't get a good education on race history in school. Have history textbooks changed to be more accurate regarding U.S. racial history? And are teachers discussing race issues directly, obviously at the grade appropriate level?
And the great thing is that, yes, books are changing. One thing that we are adamant about in Alexandria City Public Schools is we have a textbook adoption committee. And I love the fact that we have one because, you know, those are the types of questions that we're asking, especially when we're adopting history books. What history is included and how is it shared? Is it, you know, the superficial history, or is it the raw, real history, but age appropriate, you know? And those are the things that we have as our indicators for books that we recommend to the board to adopt. We specifically want the truth shared about our history in an age appropriate way, though. You know, we do believe that there are certain things that you need to be a certain age to digest and understand. But we want accurate information shared with our students. So that is the process that we use. Our teachers do discuss race issues directly in our classrooms. Sometimes we get emails about that. You know, some parents don't want, you know, their kids to talk about race in the schools even now. We have age appropriate lessons that we do provide. We provide training for our teachers. But, you know, every once in a while, a teacher might go off script. And then, you know, we have to intervene like, okay, that might have been too much for the kids. Like, that might have been a good conversation for you at your dinner table, but it's not good for the classroom. Right? We got to tone that down a little bit because we do want to make sure that, you know, it's a thin line when you start bringing in your personal feelings about things. And, you know, sometimes I even get, you know, some pushback from the community. They say, you know, Dr. Hutchins, you're trying to indoctrinate people into, you know, race relations. And I say, no, I'm just speaking about, you know, modern day issues. So I'm not trying to indoctrinate anybody into anything, right? And I try to make sure that I don't tell my personal views. Every once in a while I get personal stories, but I try not to, you know, to put my personal opinions into our discussions. But then if somebody asks me, then I'm going to tell you, don't ask me if you don't want to know. Because I believe, you know, in being transparent. If somebody asks me a direct question, I'm going to answer, you know, that question, but only because you asked.
Okay, and this one actually is a follow-up. It says follow up on the great sounding program for work and study. Is there an avenue like that for students without green cards, i.e. Not here legally?
So say that part again.
This is the follow-up to the work-study program that you mentioned earlier. Is there an avenue like that for students without green cards? And it says, i.e. not here legally. Is kind of
Yes. So now, you know, a lot of jobs now, they can't ask you to show like your proof of residency and things of that nature. Now, you know, some businesses aren't able to ask those questions. So because they are part of our schools, that allows us to navigate their work journey better versus them trying to go out and do it themselves. Because a lot of times they don't know their rights. We're able to set things up. And right now we're working to develop this program with Urban Alliance, which is it's an organization that works with high school students and helping them have employment and getting certifications and you know, workforce development and that type of thing. And that is why we're able to kind of make sure that their rights are being acknowledged throughout this process. So that was a great question, but that's how we intervene.
and I think we've got the two, possibly more. This one is actually for the sake of the children. Has anyone seriously looked at repeating the year of academic learning so they can catch up, all children to be enriched?
Yeah. So we haven't talked about repeating the learning, but we have talked about trying to provide additional supports as we move into next year and supplementing some of the learning as we move forward. And this is why we're strongly encouraging our families to have their students a part of our summer learning this summer so that they can get a boost before the fall begins. Some of our families, we're going to be calling personally, like begging for them to, you know, have their, I'm sorry, my phone was going off, begging them to, you know, have their students a part of our summer programming because they really are going to need it. And we just want them to know what the implications are if they don't. Parents still have to make the final decisions, you know, for their children, but we will strongly encourage those that really need to be there.
Okay, and I think we're down to the last question, and this was actually one that was sent over previously. So this one is, do you know if ACPS will receive a portion of the $59 million that the city of Alexandria is receiving as part of the most recent $1.9 trillion stimulus bill? If so, do you know roughly how much will go to ACPS, and any initial thoughts or on programs you'd like to start or enhance with that money?
Yeah. So I don't know how much money we're going to receive from them, but we'll take any dollar they give us. But our focus, we receive funds as well from the federal government. It's and this is our relief funds, and we're expected to receive, I mean, in total about $55 million overall, which is significant. 20% of that has to be towards academics specifically. We're focusing on social, emotional, and academic learning as one of our key areas. We're also focusing on any kind of facilities, mitigation, initiatives that we have to do in order to continue to be in compliance with like social distancing and air quality and things of that nature. And then we're also focusing on providing some of the additional supports that we know students are going to need moving forward. So we have all of that in play. We're going to be presenting to the board next month, specifically talking about the breakdown of our funding and where we're allocating those funds and the outcomes we're planning to seek. So next month, I'll have some more specifics with you, but then in general, that's where our funding will be going to.
Wonderful. and thank you so much. I believe that exhausts all the chat questions. Elizabeth, as the moderator, I think you're in charge.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you, Mondays, for monitoring the chat. And thank you, Dr. Hutchings. We so appreciate your candor and your thoughtfulness. I know that I have learned a lot, and you've given us a lot to think about and how we can be part of your plans, which sound really good moving forward. So many thanks for being with us. We really appreciate it. And wanted to let everyone know that our next gathering will be on Tuesday, May 25th at 7:30, and that will be focusing on criminal and civil justice in Alexandria. And we have a really incredible panel of folks, including some distinguished judges, attorneys, and a journalist historian. So please join us for that. And many thanks to Bob Wallace, who I think is on this call also, for organizing that. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Orrin to lead us out with prayer.
Dr. Hutchings, thank you. And thanks to all of you for being with us tonight. We're delighted. What a wonderful evening. I'm going to end this evening with the night prayer from the New Zealand Book of Common Prayer. Let us pray. Lord, it is night. The night is for stillness. Let us be still in the presence of God. It is night after a long day. What has been done has been done. What has not been done has not been done. Let it be. The night is dark. Let our fears of the darkness of the world and of our own lives rest in you. The night is quiet. Let the quietness of your peace enfold us, all dear to us, and all who have no peace. The night heralds the dawn. Let us look expectantly to the new day, new joys, and new possibilities. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Let us go in peace this night to love and serve the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Thanks be to God.
Thanks be